I found a tiny, trembling puppy hiding under a bench on a rainy night. When I tried to scoop him up, he snarled and ran away like he was on a mission. What he refused to tell me in those first frantic minutes finally led me to something I never could have imagined. My name is Maya Ortega, and I have spent the last 7 years volunteering with the City Animal Rescue, mostly at night, walking streets, answering calls, and rescuing strays who have nowhere else to turn. I know how fear looks in an animal's eyes, and I know the small ways to earn their trust. That night, the rain blurred the city into a wash of neon, and Puddle's shops were closed, and the sidewalks echoed with nothing but my boots and the steady drum of rain. I almost turned home when I saw him, small and crouched beneath a warped bench outside a shuttered laundromat. He was worse than dirty. His fur was matted, his ribs hinted through tufts, and his eyes were hard with caution. I offered my hand and a bit of chicken, but he bared his tiny teeth and sprinted away like a dog with a goal, not a frightened stray seeking safety. I hesitated, thinking to call for backup, but something about him pulled at me. His collar was the reason, old leather frayed at the seam, and from it swung a dented metal tag scratched with a single letter, maybe an L, maybe a J, weathered into ambiguity. Tucked in his fur was a torn scrap of cloth, bright yellow, with a thin blue stripe like the sleeve of a child's jacket. I picked it up and smelled only rain and the faint tang of detergent. That scrap, that letter, something about them made me follow. He moved fast and with purpose, slipping through alleys and beneath awnings, always glancing back to make sure I trailed at a distance. I kept my flashlight dim and my voice low, offering soft words and a path he could ignore if he wanted. He did not want to be bought, stroked, or hidden in someone's arms. He seemed to be on an errand, a small pilgrimage across a part of the city where memory and loss hung in the air. We passed a vacant playground where the swings swung without hands, and a row of warehouses with their doors cinched shut. He paused before a rusted slide, sniffed, and then carried on. Once he scratched at a drain grate, whining with a small, precise sound, then moved along as if satisfied with whatever he found there. I tried to lure him with treats, with my voice, with the calm I keep for frightened animals. He sniffed and walked away, every refusal anchoring my curiosity deeper. Why would a dog refuse comfort and shelter on a night like this? Because he was searching, I told myself, or because he was protecting something only he knew. The night shifted. Rain slackened to mist, and the city seemed to breathe softer. He led me down a flight of steps beneath the elevated tracks where the air smelled of metal and something faintly floral. The underpass held an echo of distant traffic, and at the foot of the steps he stopped, ears up, body rigid. He turned and looked at me, his gaze for the first time meeting mine without calculation. It was like a small contract: follow, observe, do not interfere. Then he tapped the concrete twice with his paw and glanced toward a rusted chain-link gate marked with peeling white paint. Through the links I could see a dim courtyard and a single window glowing with the pale blue light of an old television. Something moved inside, a long shadow sliding past the glass, too slow to be a person pacing. My pulse picked up, not with fear exactly, but with the electric awareness of standing at the rim of a revelation. He could have left me there, gone through some small opening, vanished into the maze of backyards and service doors. Instead, he sat and waited, tail low, eyes bright, as if to say, "This is where it begins." I stepped closer, hand raised not to touch but to steady myself. The tag on his collar winked in the dim light, a flash against the rain, and for the first time I thought I could make out the letter. It was sharp and small and somehow wrong for the night. An H. My breath hitched. An H on that battered tag, and a scrap smelling faintly of soap and cigarettes. My mind began to stitch possibilities together, each more impossible than the last. He had chosen to let me in this far, and whatever waited beyond that blue window would demand an answer. The rain softened to a whisper as I crouched to his level, feeling the city's damp breath on my neck. He set his jaw and turned his head toward the gate, urging me without a sound to follow. I rose, fingers numb but steady, and pushed open the gate a crack. The hinges complained, and the courtyard exhaled as if releasing a held breath. The light from that lone window pooled against the wet concrete, and the puppy slipped ahead, disappearing into the glow. I followed, and the air felt different inside the gate, close, charged, waiting. Whatever he had been refusing to accept, whatever secret his collar and the yellow scrap hinted at, was behind that window. I moved toward it, and as my palm touched the cool metal of the gate, the television in the window flickered once and the screen showed only static. And then a voice I did not expect said softly from somewhere beyond the glass, "Oh." The sound stopped my breath. The puppy froze and looked at the window. In the pale blue glow, an outline shifted, and the voice repeated, "Closer, Hector." "Is that you?" Frozen. I followed the puppy through the puddled street, heart pounding, keeping distance but refusing to turn back in the rain. Cars swerved around us at the intersection, brakes screaming, drivers shouting, and the puppy slipped through before I could react. A storm rolled in faster than I expected, dark clouds swallowing the skyline while rain hit the pavement like hail. I called the vet again on my phone, voice shaking, explaining the situation and asking for immediate advice and support. They told me to avoid chasing, to keep distance for safety, and to document everything from where I stood too. So I followed at the edge of the rain, phone out, camera ready, watching Puppy's purposeful movements with growing intensity. He dodged a delivery truck by the width of his head and slipped through a gap in a wire fence. Beyond the fence, the neighborhood opened into an old industrial lot that smelled of oil and forgotten machines and silence. At the lot's edge, a child's crayon drawing was nailed to a post, colors bleeding like a small, stubborn promise. It was pinned with a rusty nail, the paper damp, the name scrawled in uneven letters might have read Maggie. Footprints pressed into wet dirt led toward a broken gate and deeper into the tangle of metal, shadows, and rust. A collar hung loose around the puppy's throat, its tag dented and stamped with a partial phone number and initial. The digits smudged, the last 3 missing where rust had eaten through, so each call hit dead silence every time. I started leaving messages with my number, voice tight, promising help, food, and a vet visit for free anytime, anywhere. Sometimes the puppy would glance back, nose raised, ears pricked, as if listening for a command only he could hear. Other times he moved with such determination it felt like following a ghost, a small courier carrying secrets through darkness. He stopped at a low wall where barking dogs lifted heads as if demanding explanation from this small interloper alone. The puppy sat and refused to move, nose pointed at a rusted drain pipe, eyes fixed on something he saw there. I crawled low behind a pile of pallets to get a better look, rain steady, cold running down my neck. What I saw made my breath catch, tiny marks at the pipe base and a smear lighter than surrounding grime. They looked like small, hurried gouges, as if someone had tried and failed to grip something in the mud nearby. My mind raced with possibilities, none comforting, each drawing me further into a worry I could not set aside now. I called the shelter, left my number, and asked if anyone had reported a missing child or a person nearby. Their tone was professional, sympathetic, but careful. They said they would check records and call me if anything matched soon. I sat on a crate watching the puppy pad between discarded tires, each step deliberate as if following an invisible map. Night pressed in around the lot, floodlights sputtering, and every shadow looked like an answer I couldn't reach yet still. I thought about going home and sleeping, about rational explanations, but when the puppy shifted, my thoughts evaporated into nothing. A distant siren wailed as the city continued. I stood in rain, feeling like an intruder in someone else's story. Then the puppy moved, a quick dash past a rusted pump, and my feet followed before my brain could decide. We reached a collapsed office trailer where the door hung open and a faded poster flapped on a wet nail. Pinned to it was another crayon drawing, the same crooked sun, and on the back scrawled a name and a few numbers. The name matched the other drawing and my heart thudded, confirming something I did not want to know tonight anymore. I tried dialing the numbers again, experimenting with combinations, filling the missing digits from guesswork and desperation in the rain. Every sequence only led to voicemail, to corporate lines, or to nothing, amplifying the mystery rather than solving it yet. The puppy noticed my fumbling phone and cocked his head, a faint tremor of patience in his eyes and waiting. I followed him across the lot where old office chairs lay like toppled birds and a rusted carousel creaked nearby. We reached a hollow under a concrete slab where the puppy nosed an opening and whined, inviting me closer now. I knelt and eased the slab just enough for a sliver of light to cut the dark. My breath froze. Inside the hollow sat a small bundle of damp blankets, and something moved beneath them with a faint, irregular sound. The puppy nosed at the blankets and whined louder, his whole body trembling between urgency and fear and something else. I reached in slowly, palm open, every second stretched into a taut wire of possibility and dread and hope too. Fingers brushed fabric and something small and warm curled against my palm, a heartbeat quick and sure beneath the cloth. I lifted the blanket and found a face peeking out, wet hair matted and eyes blinking up with wary recognition. It was a child, enough to fit in my arms, shivering but breathing, color creeping back into cheeks and lips. It felt like stepping into a storybook and simultaneously slamming into a raw reality where every choice mattered right now. The child blinked and whispered a single word that shocked me, a name I recognized from the crayon scrawl again. It was the name on the drawings, the naive letters, the tiny stubborn promise nailed to the post so long. The puppy leaned into me as if to say he knew I would come. Tears surprised me, hot and immediate. I gathered the child and the puppy pressed against our chests, protective and proud. The three of us joined there. As the rain softened to mist, I realized the puppy had not been lost, he had been leading me home. My chest was a drum under my ribs as the courtyard opened before us, a tangle of broken bricks, vines braided through rusted fencing, and a collapsed shed hunched like an old sentinel. The puppy slipped between the shadows, ears pricked, moving with a purpose. I had chased him for blocks, through alleyways that smelled of rain and damp paper, and every time I tried to scoop him up, he would dodge me as if flinching from a hand that wanted the wrong thing. Now he paused at the mouth of the shed and looked back, eyes bright and urgent, as if to say, "Come on." I swallowed and followed, the floorboards sighed beneath my feet. Light leaked through a mottled skylight, slashing the dust into silver ribbons. In one corner, half shielded by a collapsed workbench and a stack of crates, lay a figure curled like a person trying to make themselves small enough to belong to the shadows. The puppy froze, low and tense, a guardian silhouette. My throat closed. For a second I thought the person was asleep, then the body shivered, a small exhalation that was almost a sound. The skin of an exposed cheek caught the light and showed me a pale, familiar angle. My fingers went cold. I moved closer, heartbeat loud, every sense sharpened. The face was turned away. The person's hair was longer than I expected, streaked with dust, and there was a thin, jagged scar across the left forearm, an old injury, raised and pale. I knew that scar. I had traced the same line with my thumb as a child, under a kitchen light, while my cousin laughed about a summer ladder and a dare gone wrong. That laugh, that ladder, the kitchen countertop where our elbows had touched, memories I'd stored like cherished coins. For a wild, suspended instant, the air hummed with the impossible. This could be him. I crouched without thinking, careful. The puppy pressed his side against my knee, a warm brush of fur anchoring me. I reached out and touched the back of the person's hand. It was cool and damp. They didn't wake. My voice sounded small in the shed when I called, "Hey, are you okay?" The man coughed once, a rough, shallow sound, and rolled his head toward me. His eyes opened, clouded with a sleep that was not rest. He stared up, and for a moment recognition flickered, and then something like fright softened his features. When he lifted his other hand, my breath stopped. There on a faded leather strap was a small photograph tucked into a plastic sleeve, secured with a paper clip. It had been pressed there like a secret. The paper was creased, the ink feathered with age. My name was on the photo in my own handwriting. I remembered writing it years ago for a family holiday card. In the picture, a younger version of him and me were side by side, both wearing crooked smiles. He had tucked that image near his heart. I remembered the disappearance, a single sentence that had haunted the family for a decade. He went out that night and never came back. It was the kind of unsolved absence that gnawed quietly at holiday tables and empty chairs. I had told myself versions of the story: blame, luck, time. To see the photograph, to know the curve of his jaw and the scar, felt like a story suddenly lifted from the back pages and set before me in startling ink. The puppy whined softly and pressed his nose against the man's wrist, nudging. The man's fingers twitched. My legs were trembling disbelief, and a flood of other feelings braided into something like prayer. I fumbled for my phone with a hand that no longer seemed under my control and dialed emergency services, barking out the address, our breaths overlapping in the tight, dusty room, the puppy's chest moving against the man's side like a metronome. While I spoke, the little dog kept watch. He would not be lured into my arms now. He crouched by the man as if he were a knight refusing to abandon his charge, eyes glazed with an intelligence that made me ache. Every time I glanced at him, the puppy looked back as if to confirm the plan. It was then I understood the puzzle of his refusal earlier, not stubbornness, not fear of hands, but a mission. He had been guiding me, testing me to see if I would follow him to the right person and perhaps to ensure I wouldn't take him away from his task. The paramedics arrived quicker than I expected, boots crunching on loose gravel, their voices brisk and kind. They moved with practiced efficiency, checking responsiveness, asking gentle questions. The puppy did not step back. One medic reached to pet him and he ducked away, not out of meanness but with that same fierce focus, as if to say, "Not yet." He allowed the rescuer to scan the man's wrist for an ID, and then he backed off and lay his head against the man's shoulder. It was an act of quiet ownership. He belonged to this person in a way I had not imagined possible. The medics worked with soft determination, securing the man on a stretcher, covering him with a warm blanket that smelled faintly of antiseptic and lemon. The puppy climbed up and sat on the edge, one paw resting on the man's arm like a sentinel keeping time. I watched him the way you watch a small, clean miracle. One of the EMTs scanned for a tag, then asked me gently, "Do you know him?" My voice came out thin but steady. "Yes," I said. "I think he's my cousin. He disappeared years ago. They took him to the ambulance." Before the doors closed, the lead medic knelt and showed me a small veterinary scanner. "Well, check his microchip and the man's ID," she said. The puppy whined and pressed his face through the open door until the medic reached in, fingers warm, and stroked his head. The dog let out a low, content sound and hopped in, taking his place by the man's feet. Even from that short distance, I could see the puppy's eyes, calm, relieved, as if his job was finally proceeding toward the answer he had sought. They wheeled the stretcher up into the ambulance, and someone called my name. My family had been alerted by a call I had made in a shaking moment. My phone vibrated, a message with a photograph, a news clipping, a memory resurfacing in pixels. The same scar, the same crooked smile from years ago. My mind filled with the sound of my mother's voice the last time we spoke of him, the way she had sighed and said, "Maybe he'll come back." That hope felt fragile and incandescent all at once. Later, a medic told me they had scanned the man's wristband and found his name. They would confirm his identity at the hospital, they said, but there was an additional step. An animal control officer would scan the puppy's microchip. I followed the ambulance in my car, hands white-knuckled on the wheel, while the puppy rode in the back, head out the window for a moment, ears throwing back like sails. He looked like a messenger who had succeeded. At the hospital, the reunion was slow and careful. The man's eyes opened and he saw us, and I recognized that look, confusion blooming into recognition, like light finding dust motes. He traced a name with a whisper and then took in the photo and the faces brought into the present. My mother arrived, collapsing into my arms with a sound that was more sob than laugh. The physicians did their work, explanations, stitches where necessary, a long talk about how he had survived, what had kept him hidden and unclaimed for all those years. The facts were messy and human and mundane, lost memory, a long chain of small misfortunes and wandering, and yet none of that shrank the miracle of this moment. The microchip scan came back and the chip registered the puppy's name and the man's contact details. Tears slid down my face as they read the name aloud, matching it to the photograph in his pocket. The puppy pressed his head against the man's knee, and when the man smiled, a small, shaky thing, the dog thumped his tail like a small percussion of joy. The reunion wasn't cinematic in a movie sense. There was no grand confession or tidy explanation, but it was utterly whole. The man reached down, fingers fumbling, and the puppy licked his knuckle, content and steady. Standing there, watching them, I understood a hard, bright truth. Animals choose. The little dog had agency in the most profound way. He had refused my immediate rescue not out of fear or mistrust, but because his loyalty was radial, not linear. He refused to be carried away from his mission. He had needed a person who would listen and follow rather than seize and remove. He had circled until he found someone patient enough to listen to his insistence and brave enough to follow him into the dark. We drove home with the puppy curled on my mother's lap, breathing like a small engine. Later, I held the photograph and traced our faces. The life lesson lodged itself in me like something small but necessary. Sometimes the help someone needs is not what we assume. Sometimes patience, trust, and careful listening are the instruments of rescue. The puppy taught us that, an animal with a fierce, uncanny loyalty and a map in his heart that led right to the place where a life could be reclaimed. I still hear the echo of his little steps in the courtyard. Insistent, patient, unafraid of guiding someone through the dark.